Yeah, I'm going to call to order the January 19th Board of Directors Workshop. It is being conducted in a hybrid format, both in person and remote, and is recorded and live streamed. We received word from the county today that there's going to be a new Community Transit County Board alternate for 2023. So we want to welcome Councilmember Megan Dunn. We look forward to seeing her at an upcoming meeting, or maybe even possibly today. We just found out today she might join in. And the clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Daughtry.
Present.
Mayor Frizzell, I see, present. Mayor Marine.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Mead. Councilmember Merrill.
Here, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Nearing. Okay. I think he's headed over. Labor Representative Norton.
Yep.
We heard him
Yep, we
earlier,
heard him.
present. Councilmember Peterson. Mayor Roberts.
Here.
Thank you. And Councilmember Schweddy.
Present.
And Mayor Nearing.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just checking to see if we have any alternates. I do believe we have Councilmember Gallagher here present in the room. Chair,
there's
that
John.
concludes roll.
John's.
All right.
here.
Thank you. Okay. So public comment. We don't have any written comments that we've received. And I want to remind the speakers that you have 3 minutes to provide your comments and verbal comments. This is your opportunity. We do have online, I think we have Sabina Araya online.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. As you talk about the 2024 network today, I'd like to remind you that it is about 100,000 service hours short of what you had approved at the end of 21 before the vaccine mandate. Service is the primary function of this agency, and you are now spending a disproportionate amount of time, of money supporting the same level of service you had 7 years ago. The lack of fairness in the application of this mandate for drivers, the discrimination against those with religious exemptions, the lack of labor representation that chose to make a deal behind closed doors without the vote of the membership, and even the way you have been silent and unwilling to correct these wrongs is very telling of where the agency is now. It is a far cry from where Emmett left it in terms of service, in terms of agency culture, in terms of integrity. I've presented to you facts regarding service that I thought you might not know. I was a bit naive to think that you cared that what was implemented was different than what you approved, and that the public was completely blindsided in all of this. None of you except Mayor Nearing even bothered to explain your stand on the data. I've requested a written response from the board in December. It's been 6 weeks. What is your standard response time to your constituents, if I may ask? There's no scientific or safety basis for what you have in place right now. A vaccine mandate that is obsolete because it doesn't include the boosters, mask requirements for unvaccinated in your boardroom, where your riders on buses sit next to each other. It's like you're living in the twilight zone, and 2022 never even happened. I'll remind you that in 2021, there were 81 cases at CT for COVID. In 2022, 292. How did so many vaccinated employees get COVID? How did this policy work in stopping the spread? Who are you serving as a board member? The least I could do, and it's not much, is to create a permanent public record of how this agency failed in 2022. It made a crisis so much more than it needed to be. Of how you as leaders failed to keep in check a policy that brought nothing but devastation to this agency. I spent a lot of time to be here and gave you a lot of opportunities to make things right. This is my 9th time and the last. Not even Moses went to the Pharaoh more than this. At this point, since facts don't seem to make a difference to you, I'll leave it to God to convince each and every one of you in your own way that firing those that didn't take the vaccine because of their convictions was a wrong. That still needs to be made right. And you cannot move on and thrive unless you have justice. This is how you lose trust. Everyone sees that pride and politics have now replaced your common sense and integrity. And I don't know how you can live with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Araya. All right. Is there any, in terms of public comment, is there anybody in the room? I don't have anybody signed up, but there's anybody in the room who would like to address the board? And is there anybody else online? All right, Mayor Naring.
Just real quickly, Mr. Chair, I do want to thank Sabina for her testimony and over this one and the several others, as well as others who have spoken to this. Not going to belabor the point. My views on this are well known. I do believe the vaccine mandate should be lifted, should have been lifted long ago for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which, would help us hire back some drivers. But I would also say that I did ask the city or the CT attorneys 2 or 3 months ago, I think, to take a look at whether the board had the authority to lift that mandate. His conclusion and communication back to the board was that we do not, that is strictly an authority that resides within the CEO. So, I respect that ruling by the attorney and the CEO's authority there. But I have made it well known my feelings on that I do believe it was a mistake, and I thank Sabina for her testimony, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Naring. Okay, since there are no more verbal comments online or in the room, we'll go to the CEO's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very brief today, not a full report. I wanted to respond to your mention of Councilmember Dunn joining the board as an alternate. I reached out to her this afternoon and introduced her and her staff to Rachel. So we'll be following up to onboard her and get her what she needs to participate in board activities. Also, just as a preview to the information we're going to review today, as part of our workshop agenda, I was able to visit downtown Seattle on Tuesday and meet with Julie Tim, my counterpart at Sound Transit, and had a couple of meetings with her and some members of her team on the subject matter that we're going to review today. So I'm feeling pleased at the level of engagement and collaboration we're seeing between the two agencies. We don't have full answers yet, but we have a lot of work going on between our respective staffs, and hopeful as of now that we'll figure out a way to work together and make the launch of the light rail system successful and the reorganization of our network successful as well. A lot of work to go, and Roland and his team and Thomas in particular are going to work through that stuff today. As we prepare to switch gears and start the staff presentation part of the workshop, I just want to flag for the board's consideration. You're getting an update on new information that we've learned over the past couple of months that affect our ability to implement our 2024 network plan. The changes in the schedules for the light rail system openings is going to require us to shift our schedule. So we'll now be referring to it as the 2024 and beyond plan. There are two primary drivers of those changes. One is the aforementioned light rail opening schedule. And Thomas will talk about this. You've heard a little bit about it before. Linwood Link may be opening later than originally expected, and it may be opening at a lower level of service than originally expected. And if those things happen, then it affects our ability to redeploy our service into the vision that we've presented to our constituent cities over the past couple of years. The second is a potential WashDOT project to rehabilitate I-5 that would replace all of the pavement in the I-5 corridor between the Ship Canal Bridge and North Seattle. That is a project that would essentially close a pair of lanes at a time for extended periods of time, thus adversely affecting traffic flow and transit performance. So our goal is to get all of these big projects, our network restructure, our BRT projects, Sound Transit light rail projects, and WashDOT's pavement rehabilitation project aligned in a way that makes sense for the public. As we think about these issues and hear from staff today and discuss them, we're looking for your input on what's important to you, your reaction to the direction we're headed to try to solve some of these issues, and to consider that as we go out and prepare to engage the public for our final round of public engagement on the draft 2024 and beyond plan, that we will be introducing these issues as a new element. We're not changing the vision. Our plan is still to redeploy our service from downtown and UW to build a more robust local network here in Snohomish County. That vision remains intact. What's new is that we'll have an interim operating plan that we'll have to consider that fits with the phased light rail openings. That may be a mix of what we do now and what we're hoping to do in the future. So this new element is something we're going to have to ask our constituents, our partner cities to respond to over the next couple of months as we reshape the plan. So with that introduction, that concludes my report.
Wow, that was slightly shorter than the executive committee. I have a question on the one. Do you know, is that the 2-lane closure? What scary part is for multiple years, is that north and south, both directions?
It's both directions, although not at the same time. So the plan would be when they're working in the northbound direction, they would use the express lanes to handle the southbound traffic and vice versa. But closing 2 lanes at a time on the main line to do the work. So you'll, at any given time, you'd be down a pair of lanes in one direction or the other.
Yeah, that would have been great if you could have done that during the COVID when nobody was driving.
They were working on the West Seattle Bridge.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's always a tough thing, right? I mean, you got to get on the lanes to work on them, but you need to, yeah. So it's a kind of a catch-22. All right. So we have a couple of presentations. We're going to start with the 2024 network plan update. Mr. Hildrenfritz, can you introduce?
Thomas Tomola from the Planning and Development Department to walk you through what we know.
Mr. Tomola.
Thank you. Let's see, we're all set. Okay. So today I'm going to provide an update of a couple different issues all converging on the 2024 network plan update. You kind of see the contrast of the bus rail integration with a lot of work going on at the freeway. There's a critical good state of repair project on I-5 through Central and North Seattle that was built in the 1960s. It's very well utilized by our transit services, both ourselves, Metro, Pierce Transit. It was last renovated. Estimate was in the mid 1980s, so it's sort of overdue for some work. So today I'm going to give you a brief overview of our kind of current status of our 2024 transit network restructure. There was a deeper dive on this at committee yesterday. You'll be getting a full tour of this on the board meeting on February 2nd. That will kick off kind of the final plan and the final public outreach process, which will culminate with a public hearing and targeted adoption in April. I'm also going to kind of do a little bit of a correspondence course here in Revive I-5, kind of going over kind of the big takeaways and what it means to our existing service, both pre-Linwood Link and post-Linwood Link. And I'm going to get into some of the dynamics with Sound Transit's pretty fluid light rail schedule for all their active extensions that are under construction, both East Link to Redmond, Bellevue, and Linwood Link and Federal Way. And then kind of go in the next steps, kind of where we're kind of heading with this and sort of our initial recommendation and opening up for discussion. Since it's a workshop, I might pause a little bit along the way to sort of, create some space for some questions because it is a lot of content. So just kind of flashback here, 2024 network plan service goals. This is basically kind of where we started in 2020, 2021, looking at, connecting bus to light rail, expanding access to frequent service, coming out of the pandemic and with the sort of restructure around Link Light Rail, adjusting to a changing market and then focusing on equitable access. And this is all underpinned by travel made easy for all. So the key takeaways of the final draft network, and as Chris likes to say, my system planning manager, please excuse the small map. We have a very large service area there, but that's it's a very large amount of service, a lot of coverage on the map. Where our tactic with this is to keep it narrow enough to kind of fit within about a couple year time frame, but keep it flexible enough to allow us to grow as resources go online, and also adapt to some of these really moving targets, whether it's with WashDOT's freeway reconstruction and also Sound Transit's Lake Light Rail. We have the Swift Line expansion. We have a new express route system, sort of a rebranding, repurposing of our commuter routes, intra-county feeding light rail, 3 times as many routes with 20-minute or better frequency, and double the amount of routes with 30-minute or more frequency. We're again adapting to that kind of shifting trend and more frequent local service and relocalization of demand in general. So the first stop here is Revive I-5. I'm going to take a real quick look here and drill down into the scope and timeline and how it relates to our proposed network restructure. Yeah, this photo is kind of the northern edge of the project area, looking down at kind of where the North Gate and express lanes kind of come online. This is a typical day, some water pooling on the roadway and a lot of commercial vehicles. I'm going to come back to the express lanes. I think Rick touched on that a little bit. That's a critical element of what they're proposing. So the Revive I-5 project is a state of good repair project. It's spanning, from all the way from 117th, just north of Northgate, down to the International District at Yesler, 8 miles. It's tackling a lot of pavement, bridge work, some lighting work there in the background, and a lot of kind of bringing the freeway and getting rid of all the potholes and things like that. You can't do it all at once. You can't do it incrementally. It's a 4-year project. They're looking to do this and as quick as possible, avoiding kind of what's happened the last 20 years down in Tacoma with a lot of the HOV lane projects, where it took a generation kind of to work through that whole ensemble of things. And they're moving on a very aggressive timeline, design build out for RFP this March, which means a lot of the planning work has to be done January, February to feed that contract procurement, and notice to proceed this fall. And they've indicated major construction, that's those lane closures, would be underway at the beginning of the 2024 construction season in the spring. So let's see. There we go. So this is kind of a content-rich slide, but it's pretty good overview of kind of what the details are, what's proposed. And I'm going to pause a little bit for some questions here, but it's long-term linear closures. So on I-5 in that area, the typical cross-section is you have several general purpose lanes and you have a reversible express lane, which is not the same width north to south. And during construction, the focus is not on the express lanes, it's on those general purpose lanes that are always either southbound or northbound all day. They would close 2 lanes off at a time, create a safety work zone with a buffer space and a K-rail or jersey barrier for roadway worker protection. And the work would be taking place 24/7, all hours a day behind that concrete barrier. That means you'd have 2 main lines closed, other main lines open. To mitigate that, the first real critical piece is the express lanes would be open in the same direction all day. And so we've had some trial of this recently on a snow day where personnel were pulled off to deal with a snow event, and the express lanes were on AM southbound mode all day. Pretty noticeable, but that was kind of like a soft test. They're really pushing diversion to other routes. So that means transit, that means parallel arterials, through Seattle, Highway 99. So I'll just kind of stop for a second and kind of answer any questions. It's a lot of information. Yes.
So this is going on for 2 years. Is there also a plan to revive the express lanes?
I've heard that in discussion meetings, but it's not part of this contract. This contract is just looking at the general purpose lanes, north and south. I believe they might have been, and we can get back to that, renovated at a different time, and they have less use on them. They're not open all day, for example. But I've heard them talk about that as like another
But it's not
project.
included in Revive I-5
No.
project.
It would not work as proposed without it.
No, I was thinking maybe when they got done with the 4 years of fixing I-5, then we have another X number of years as they fix the express lanes. Just wondering what's next with them, but
We can definitely follow up on that. It's really, and I'll show all the other projects going on
Yes,
simultaneously as well. And
I've heard
yeah,
the list. Thank you.
that's-
Yes, having worked down in the S curves of 405, I'm familiar with that, and that's always been under construction as well. Do you know if there's any plans for WashDOT to be working on 405 at the same time?
That is one of the next slides, so.
Yes.
I would expect that we're gonna see ridership really increase on light rail in those 4-year periods, right? I mean, you can get right there with starting construction and get on light rail to head south. Not that anybody would want to go south. We have so much going on here north, but
Well, part of the issue we're trying to address here is that for the first 2 years, there wouldn't be any light rail,
Right.
except what's there today.
well, but I'm saying is the construction's really starting at Northgate anyway, right? So that you could drive to there. Well, it's still gonna back it up. You'll take the back roads to Northgate, catch light rail.
So one more question, clarification. It's my understanding WashDOT is starting down south and moving north? Or are they closing that whole stretch to revive it?
This is a design build contract, so the only certain element is they won't have a simultaneous northbound and southbound closure, but everything else is sort of open for discussion and allowing the contractor to have some maximum flexibility.
Okay,
Yeah.
makes sense.
So Thomas, I had a quick question too. So essentially, if I'm hearing you right, the volume of the express lanes is going to go away for 4 years. Is that correct?
It would go away in at least one direction all day. So if they're working, in this example, northbound, they'd be operating northbound only all day. So that means during the AM commute, they would be unavailable for the AM commute going into Seattle. So they'd be either stuck in northbound mode or southbound mode to mitigate all day for the loss in capacity through the construction zone.
Okay. Glad I live in Stanwood. That's all I got to say.
So next slide, I'm going to get more kind of into the less out of the construction piece, more into the sort of transit sort of side of this and kind of what it means for all of what we do and how we deliver our service, our customers and our employees. There's a lot of multi-agency coordination going on a weekly basis since probably about the fall, as the RFP for WashDOT has gotten to a state of readiness, and as Sound Transit's updated their board. This definitely, the key takeaway, directly impacts our Seattle commuter service, and a large tranche of that, probably the super majority, is contracted service. There's a few routes that are not contracted, but it would really hit that contracted commuter service pretty hard. Parallel north-south arterials in Seattle have limited crossings of the ship canal. You're looking at half of them in that one photo right there. There's only a few bridges like Mott Lake, 99, Ballard's kind of far away, and I-5. So just, really important to know that. And we use a lot of these surface streets actually for deadheading, especially a commuter operation when PM traffic is really heavy coming from base, getting into downtown Seattle. So we use every trick in the book there is to get our buses moving through this part of the network. Freeway incidents can be very impactful. As you know, if you've been driving anywhere throughout your life, that's these non-reoccurring incidents really throw things off, and through a construction zone that can have a deeper magnitude. Linwood Link, one of the key punchlines today, is a critical piece of this puzzle. And WashDOT will have many freeway construction projects in the region underway on 405 and 520 in particular outside of this corridor. So with that, I'm just going to show this big map here. Kind of hard to look at all the rectangles here, but if you look at the map on the right, those are all the represented projects that are kind of going on at once. They're not all the same scope and scale, but the ones that are really notable are the ones on 405 on the north end right there. You're going to have the installation and construction of direct access ramps. That's for the Stride BRT program, and also for the new toll lanes. And then 520, the part by Montlake will be wrapping up, and then the part west of Montlake tying in with I-5 will be starting up, including the Portage Bay Bridge, and then we have Revive I-5. And Councilmember Merrill's question, yeah, 405, the south end of it from I-90 down to Renton, that will be about its last year construction. There'll still be some heavy construction going on at that time. And there's a lot of other things going down by Tacoma at that point as well. So kind of switching gears here, kind of talking more about bus transit, rail transit, and regional transit integration. What you're looking at is a service map, and that's what the regional sound transit network looks like a couple years down the road when Link is done over, all the way to Federal Way. Bellevue, Redmond, the Stride BRT line is running on State Route 522 and end-to-end on 405 essentially. And at that point, the key takeaway here is that you have two lines of service going to Linwood, one coming from the east side, that blue line with the two, and another one coming from SeaTac and Federal Way up to Linwood. What that means for the customers is basically show and go service. You show up, there's a train every 4 minutes, and you get down to University of Washington in 20 minutes, downtown about half an hour, and many other places beyond. There's also a lot of redundancy in the network at that point. If I show up in Linwood, I want to get to Bellevue, something's not working out on 405, I can take the train. Shangri-La, everything is awesome. And the enabling thing for the rail service plan, a key thing for our service restructure as proposed, is the access to that picture right there. That's the Link maintenance facility where all the operators and trains come from for the two line basically. And without that connection, without that project being open, we have half the service going up to Linwood. Linwood would only be fed from the yard, the maintenance facility in Soto in South Seattle. So that's a little bit of a stretch even with the one line service. So this is directly from a presentation from Sound Transit in December. There's a critical element here, even though that two line, the part across the bridge across Lake Washington is being rebuilt. There's some construction issues. Without access to that, the line doesn't connect up to Linwood, but there's still potential for a starter line going from South Bellevue to Redmond Technology Center. And that decision to launch that line kind of pushes out the launch of the Linwood extension about 1 quarter, about a service change or so. That is important to note. What's probably more important is that access, that activation of that two line service to have that robust service level, that quality of service, and that capacity, which in both of these scenarios is sort of in that spring 2025, call it March to June type of time frame. So that's a little ways off from today, and it's a bit further away from when Linwood could launch as well. So that's very critical to our thinking and what we've been kind of meeting about with our agency partners for launching our network restructure. So this is the real simplified version of kind of what I described today. This is what the service on Link looks like. You have trains from Angle Lake or the airport running due north up the North Gate, one line every 8 minutes. With half service, without any additional capacity or anything, you'd have that same service, but you're just stretching it out. You have to add some more trains, more operators, but you're extending 4 stations to Linwood. The starter line in the east side is not so much relevant for transit service in Linwood, but very relevant to sort of the overall equation of how everything gets sequenced and delivered. Slide. So on top of everything I just said, there's just, kind of full disclosure outside of things that have currently delayed things. At that same presentation, it was also noted that there's some other things that could throw schedules off that add a lot of schedule risk to the overall kind of opening of Link and our network restructure. These are things that should look kind of familiar. There's hiring, training, things in the construction trades with potential for supply chain issues that could add time. These are kind of things going on in that industry throughout the region, but just really noting that these are schedule milestones, a lot of variability, but this is as it's known as of December, January. So going into this, as we began to finalize our bus service restructure and get very familiar with kind of what Sound Transit was and what WashDOT was doing and putting all these pieces together, we had some big questions to ask. And one was, what does bus service and capacity look like today in the I-5 North Corridor? We've had some service reductions. We had major shifts in riderships. We have some routes like our North Linwood and Everett routes, which are seeing some pretty good return in ridership. A lot of other ones running at quarter capacity with a lot of open seats. So how does that mean for our service just from a volume capacity, travel demand standpoint? How does this, if you take all this, how does data modeling and demonstrate how adequate if there's just, a 4-car train running every 8 minutes, you throw in all these new stations, the bus riders, what does that mean for customers trying to get on the train, especially coming back the other direction, coming northbound from downtown Seattle north? How could opening with half this planned service on Linwood Link impact our overall, transit restructure plans? If there's some half service, some base service of Link out there, would we go all in and do that full network restructure, or will we stage that or phase that? That's one of the key things for discussion today. And then that being said, how does that, I think Mayor Marine, you asked this earlier, is, if you factor in Revive I-5, how does that, move the datum of, how does that, actually further increase demand on top of everything else? So, distilling this down to kind of something more graphical or simple. This is kind of our current trajectory. You have Sound Transit's Link Light Rail, you have our network service restructure, you have WashDOT's Revive I-5. They're not very well sequenced, especially Revive I-5. Long linear closures start before we are opening Link, and start before there's 2-line service, and start before we can move commuter buses as proposed out of downtown Seattle. So at a minimum, there's, call it a 6-month period where there's no Linwood Link Light Rail, there's still buses on I-5, and there's Revive I-5 construction that's pretty impactful going on either southbound or northbound, to be determined. So a better alignment, a better trajectory here would be, Linwood Link opening up at full service, our network restructure, providing the extra capacity, Revive I-5 early work, kind of commencing in sort of an interim period. They discuss working on the ramps versus the main line. And then when stuff is, at least most of the way there, maybe not all full 2 lines, but kind of halfway between 1 line and 2 lines, having that heavy construction start, which would allow us, we feel confidently, to kind of really do the full network restructure. So next steps here. So a lot of work is going on since December with a lot of our agency partners, but what we've concluded based on some initial ridership modeling through Sound Transit and sort of comparing notes with data that we have and they have, and WashDOT with traffic and diversion estimates, we feel that there'd be, with half service, there'd be some significant overcrowding with Revive I-5 construction uncertainties. The service, even like in a holiday week in January, there's routinely standees, especially in the PM peak coming out of Westlake going towards Capitol Hill. And our staff here in planning has asked Sound Transit staff to provide analysis of additional service capacity when Linwood Link opens. That is not just like, you know, full 4-car max length trains. That would be throwing some additional service like we do with our bus system. We call them trippers or peak trips that kind of are out there when you most need them, when demand is highest. And demand's the shape of it. There's still peak. It's a lot different than it was about 3 or 4 years ago, but it's still pretty pronounced. And we get a lot of special events and sort of seasonality to traffic and transit in this corridor in general. Sound Transit's actually confirming the ultimate feasibility of this with the respective operations group, which is both their internal operations and with their operator, which is King County Metro Rail. We recommend a phased network implementation approach, and this allows us to sort of not go forward, not go backwards, adapt as conditions change, but sort of remain on track on that plan that's proposed for adoption. And anything we do is kind of moving towards that ultimate network vision, but sort of in a different sequence and a phased approach. So with that, our staff is outlined kind of this, you know, early, very high level, not very route specific, but looking at a phasing of how we might kind of build into that network plan over about an 18-month period. So starting in early 2024, we have the Swift Orange line launching. WashDOT's engineering staff has been very definitive that, you know, comes that construction season, 2024, call it end of March, they'll be starting those long linear closures on I-5. So at that, you know, with March service change, what would we propose to do? We would propose to launch the Swift Orange line, restore frequency on existing Northgate routes, maintain most of the Seattle commuter routes, really looking at some efficiencies or duplication between some of the Northgate routes and some of the Seattle routes that are going directly to Seattle still today. And kind of a best practice, what we learned during the pandemic, when we had crowding to mitigate, it was adding some standby buses. Those are buses that are out in critical locations. We have them today, but adding some more to protect the commuter service because we're concerned about buses not getting to pick up the passengers and then kind of getting back without the passengers the other way, sort of the two-way trips without buses that make 4 trips throughout the commute. And when we kind of get beyond that, sort of in that little bit of variability, late 2024, if we had half service, which is not a desirable outcome, but if we want to kind of think about what does that universe entail, we'll be moving Northgate connections to Linwood, economizing around that, moving a lot of our Snohomish County customers to a closer, you know, kind of more efficient and easier to get to a local connection to light rail. Opening the Blue Line extension, the Shoreline North and 185th, that station will be complete. That is relatively easy to do by itself, provided the station is open with light rail service. And then connecting through Montlake Terrace Station, which would be open for light rail, but we have a lot of routes in our existing system that go through there, really emphasizing those for connection, especially at South County, and still maintaining most of our Seattle commuter routes. Oh, sorry. First day with new technology. Maintaining most of those routes, but not pulling all of them out of Seattle especially because of capacity concerns, service quality concerns. We think there's sort of a Goldilocks kind of scenario. The porridge is too cold with 2A, maybe just right with 2B, where we have that half service, but it's supplemented, just like with our bus system today, with some supplemental peak service, call it 75% service. Remaining steps with that would be confirming whether this is doable, possible, sustainable. We have some initial read that that's sort of within the realm of possibility, but it still has to be run through the gauntlet of Sound Transit's operations departments. That would allow us, pending that service, to implement the structure of our network. This 2024 network is kind of like a master plan. It includes a structure of new routes with some growth potential to sort of increase frequency and throughout the day as we grow a service. And then lastly, kind of 3, which is that ultimate crossing the finish line state right there, kind of early mid 2025, implementing in any scenario the CT network restructure, and that would be with two route service at Linwood City Center Station. So with that, I'll just open it up for questions.
Could I make one additional comment? I just wanted to describe under scenario or phase 2B there, what Thomas is referring to with the 75% link service plan, what that would look like, and what we've worked with them to try to analyze is bringing enough vehicles and being able to store enough light rail vehicles on the west side of the lake to be able to operate more frequent service between Northgate and downtown. So you get those more frequent headways in the most heavily used part of the system, and taper to longer headways further north. That's a potential solution to balance the loading in the light rail system between the King County users and the Snohomish County users. That in theory would provide enough capacity in the rail system for us to pull our service back and redeploy within the county as planned. So that's the issue that we're currently focusing on, and we don't have answers yet as to whether that's going to be feasible. So I just wanted to provide a little more detail there.
Yeah, who exactly makes the decision, the final decision? And what could board members do besides just supporting our CEO to make what we want to happen?
I think if I go back, maybe start outside of the service plan, maybe go back to kind of this slide. Definitely right now we're on this trajectory, like where everything's very much out of sequence, and there's not enough capacity when you need it, and that really pushes back our ability to really do anything substantial and impactful for our customers with our network. It's really getting to this. There's, kind of work to kind of really push this forward, providing the extra capacity for Link, but also, a lot of the WashDOT work, could it be sequenced a little bit better? So you kind of, you're not doing the really heavy stuff sort of early in 2024, trying to push it a little bit up in the calendar year. And that buys us a lot of time and a lot of help across the board. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Just as far as roles and responsibilities here. So the Sound Transit Board will make the decisions on the opening dates for the light rail segments. And they're being ably supported by their staff. WashDOT will make the decision on the schedule for the Revive I-5 project. And we're in the process now of engaging with Secretary Millar and his team to try to persuade them to consider this type of scenario here, where we're bringing the projects into alignment. So those are the decision makers. Our decision here that this board has to make is the adoption of our 2024 and beyond system plan, so that staff then has guidance to go out and plan that service, do all the associated analysis, scheduling, preparing to bid the work with our unions and whatnot. So those are the 3 decision makers.
Well, I understand on the WashDOT thing, because my experience, we're not going to have any influence. I'm sorry. That's just where I'm coming from. Everything we've tried has not worked. But what you're saying then is that or am I hearing this right? So Sound Transit has basically already made the decision on putting things out. So they haven't.
No, they're I'll back up to earlier last year. They did a series of risk assessments on their various light rail projects to try to affirm when they could open. It was always assumed that the East Side project would open first and provide that cross lake connection that would then allow Linwood to open. What they discovered in their risk assessments is they had some schedule risks being driven by supply chain issues, some construction performance, the concrete strike affected them pretty severely. So the Linwood schedule and the East Side schedule fell out of sync. So the staff at Sound Transit informed the board of this information, and they were then directed to begin looking at new opening dates for those various segments. And that's the process they're in now. And they're being pretty transparent about that. But I think I'm not sure what the schedule is right now for the board to make those decisions. They'll be talking about it at their board meeting next week, but it's going to play out here over the next month or so.
So it has nothing to do with money, lack of money.
I don't think so.
Well, there's just a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah.
That was why I asked. Okay, thank you.
So Tom, is the Revive I-5 part of the 16-year Move Washington package, or is it a separate, do you know?
Believe it's separate from that, and it's a different, I don't know if we have our money.
And the reason I
It's
ask
alright,
is
yeah.
because, yes,
Yeah.
good. Well, the point is, I mean, obviously nobody wants to be in the 16th year of the Move Washington. We're glad there's funding for some of our projects, but nobody wants to be in the 16th year. It just seems to me, this is a no-brainer. If anybody's paying attention at WashDOT, it's like, why would you do this when we are this close to having a solution? Why would you just really muck it up early by doing it 6 months early? Just delay it a year. Or like you said, do some of the other projects, whether that's the on-ramps, and there's got to be something they can do that is also important, right? Work that needs to be done when we're this, because that's going to be a nightmare. And I can't, I don't like to go to Seattle anyway, but I really won't want to go now. So I just assumed if it was part of that package, there are plenty of projects that we would like to move up and just delay that one a year or two, but anyway, I don't know.
So we got
Dan,
the
who can you
Revive.
talk to? We know Senator Leas is the chair of Senate Transportation, and maybe, and we have a good relationship at Community Transit with him. And I'm assuming you've talked to him about this particular one yet?
Senator Elias?
Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay.
We're working at the staff level. We haven't concluded yet. We need to elevate things.
Yeah, that might be good to do. So,
Yeah, and just to kind of clarify an earlier question, tie stuff together, what we're really trying to do is kind of how can we work within this framework and be a little bit more flexible, so we're not getting some feedback from the board today. So we're not doing service change after service change after service change. We originally envisioned our network as having one big flipping of the switch. We're not just doing little chunks of it over over a 1 or 2 year period. We're really trying to minimize that because of the, for our customers and all the logistics of just sort of restructuring an entire network and doing retraining and all those installations of bus stops and all those things we have to do, really keeping it simple and not complicated.
so what's our timeline in terms of having to? Well, you're pointing at someone. Oh, yeah, I was just curious. But the timeline in terms of when do we have to know this, because the decision might be completely different if WashDOT changes what they're doing, and if they don't, so it's kind of hard to know. But Mayor Fazell.
So here I am in the middle of a meeting where I'm wearing 3 hats. In case you didn't see the tripod here. Obviously, City of Linwood, we've been very vested in what's going on, wearing my Sound Transit hat, wearing my CT hat. My bottom line is Snohomish County has been left out. We've got Pierce County that's had the benefit of light rail. We've got King County that's had the benefit of light rail. And I think Snohomish County needs to have the ability to ride also. And I understand that there are problems that, weren't of Sound Transit's making and weren't of WashDOT's making. But the idea that of beginning the starter line in Bellevue that's not attached to the spine would push us out. At the same time, I understand that until I-90 gets fixed and rebuilt, we're not going to have 4-minute headways. We're going to be stuck at 8. Let's leave DOT off of my concern. Is if those were the only 2 problems, we would still have problems with, we would be able to get people onto the trains in Linwood every 8 minutes to go down to Seattle. But there's already quite an impact of people getting on the train in Northgate and UW going south. My concern, and it's similar to what Rick talked about a little bit ago, is let's see some numbers. Let's see how much compression we're getting. Are we going to load up trains in Linwood, in Malik Terrace, in Shoreline to the point that people cannot get on at Northgate? We need to see some numbers there. My next concern comes when people get done with work at the end of the day. Are they going to be able to get on all these trains? Or are we overloading the Sound Transit spine so much that we've got problems because we can only do trains every 8 minutes? I want to have a quality product out there for the people who live and reside in Mukilteo, Arlington, Darrington, Everett, all of those places where CT commutes people from, so that they can have a shorter commute down to Seattle and back. This is a tough problem, and this has been floated by Sound Transit for a couple of months now, and we're still dealing with it. So now let me put on my Sound Transit board hat, and there's still some issues to be figured out on the Sound Transit side, because they don't want to be unduly impacting ridership either. And the whole problem with the faulty construction and the concrete strike have impacted them in a way that they're wringing their hands, as I am, as to how do we start? How do we make this a good start for Snohomish County? Right now, we have told people in Snohomish County, we're coming. Linwood Light Rail is going to open July of 2024 was going to be the date. Then when we got the concrete strike, it was going to be December of 2024. Now it's the plinth problem, the construction snafu. It's one thing after another that has snowballed, and nobody has planned this, nobody has caused this, but it has happened, and it's happened to all of us. And I've talked to Roger Millar at DOT, and he's also on the Sound Transit Board. So we have an interesting Sound Transit Board meeting coming up, and we've got quality people on that board. We have people that want to find answers. Nobody's being untransparent. Nobody's hiding anything. It's how do we do the best for all of our communities? And no decisions have been made, but they are coming. And I trust Sound Transit enough to say that we will have a robust conversation. And Snohomish County just wants to ride. We want the benefit, just like King County and Pierce County have had the opportunity to for X number of years. It's time for Snohomish County to get on board.
So it goes, thank you. As a very good insight that you have from the Sound Transit Board, which is always helpful. It's probably why we have a rep there. So we keep an
Could
eye
be.
on things. But do we know what our, I don't want to say drop dead date, but what is our, where community transit has to decide what they're going to do?
Well, the other piece of my presentation was on our network plan, so that will go in front of the board early February on the 2nd with a target adoption in April. Before that, in parallel, we have to provide some clarity to WashDOT on their RFP about, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. As indicated earlier, there isn't too much flexibility to kind of move that decision making too far. But anything would really help if they could start northbound, not southbound, if they could move things over, and anything we can influence at this point with that. They're all kind of ending up in the early spring for a final decision. Those are two critical pieces.
So I may want to put Roland on the spot here in a second, but Mayor Frizzell's not the only member of the Sound Transit Board from Snohomish. She's not bearing this burden alone. We've also met with and briefed Mayor Franklin and Executive Summers, and thanks to the leadership of the three of them, they've bought us some time to do some analysis on the Goldilocks alternative that Tom has presented. So we need time to complete that work. It's not clear yet whether that work can be done on the same timeline that we're anticipating board action here on the network plan. Roland and Thomas have been very diligent about trying to keep our planning on schedule because of the downstream effects, but I'm going to rephrase your question, Mr. Chair, and how much flexibility do we have on that April timeline?
This is the guy that'll be doing the work, but I guess I think the question about the timing in terms of approval of what I'm going to call, and I think what you used even in terms of the master plan. So we really have, there's really two different bodies of decisions in terms of just transit specific work that we're talking about. So the middle row on that chart up there, not the Sound Transit decisions, not the WashDOT decisions. We need to approve first a design for the overall network. And so for that, we're asking you to momentarily suspend concern about the interim condition, but look at the end of the road and say, what ultimately makes sense for Snohomish County in terms of the transportation needs, the resources that community transit has to bring to bear against those needs in the design of that service plan. And so that's informed by all the best practice that Thomas and Chris and their team have brought to the table in terms of analysis of data, looking at where the most recent information on travel demand is pointing, the resources that we have, and also the input that we've received so far through 2 robust phases of public outreach. So that's going to inform that ultimate network vision. We really need a decision on that. And that's what we're pushing for in this public process, to say that by April, we hope to have your confirmation of that design. There then will be a series of steps to implement that network, and that will be influenced by these other 2 parties at the table in terms of Sound Transit and WashDOT on where they land on these project decisions, as well as community transit's accumulation of operating capacity to put out the full frequency that we've designed in that network. And we know that will likewise take a series of service changes for us to ramp up to that ultimate capacity. I guess what I'm going to suggest is that there could be the initial focus on the shape of that master plan, and did we get the network right, and then allow us to continue to navigate these decision processes with Sound Transit, WashDOT. And we're going to try and buy as much runway for staff as possible, because this is the biggest deal that community transit has ever had in terms of network restructures. It's a whole different order of magnitude than our organization is accustomed to. And so we're going to need some time to, even without all of this, that would take time for us to deliberately work through and plan. Rick indicated we've got agreements with labor groups. We've got refitting of our, bus stops out on the road. We've got roadways we're going to be on that we've never been on previously. So that's all going to take some time and effort to deliberately plan. But I think if we were to focus on the April decision and then within that approved envelope of service design, then bring back information to the board on here's now how we're taking the first bite, the second bite, beginning to roll out the delivery of that service plan. We still will have we have some guardrails around that process that we won't be able to stray outside of. You adopt a service plan, it has a shelf life, so this can't extend indefinitely. But if it's within that approximately 24-month time frame that we've laid out for this to reach its maturity level, we'll be on track. And so that, I guess, I think that's what we're proposing in terms of an approach to this process that will keep it moving and keep us focused on that decision that allows a lot of other internal planning to proceed. The specific question about delay, what would it mean if we bumped it to May or bumped it to June instead of April as a decision point on that ultimate master plan? That's where we start to get concerned, because we've got decisions around contracts, around long lead time planning processes, planning for all kinds of different internal adaptations that are going to be required to put this network out. So we can probably absorb a little bit of delay, but it really starts to get to that critical point. The last thing I'll say is we had been focusing on December as an initial decision point for this network. Everybody remembers we had to deal with a lot of other very emergent service issues in the fall in order to get to a decision for the March service change. So we put this off. And so April is the delay date. We're hoping we don't have to go any further than that. Hopefully that answers the question and gives a sense of what this initial decision means. And then there will be further structural conversations after that in terms of what's the rollout plan.
Answers my question. We're asking you to consider and take action on the vision, and have a high tolerance for iteration on what that interim plan eventually looks like. And so, thanks.
No, that actually makes me feel better that what we're being decided on is going to be regardless of, exactly the timeline that the Link Light Rail in Linwood is at full capacity, and regardless of what happens with WashDOT and how long that takes for that, this is our goal. This is the plan that we want to put in place. We may have to implement that differently because of outside forces. And yeah, so I don't know, it makes me feel better that we're not locking ourselves into something. So, all right, was there more?
That's it.
Any more
Well,
questions?
because the chair hasn't taken the opportunity, I'll take the opportunity. I think they need to do Revive I-5 with a little tagline says, "Everybody stay home."
Yeah. It'll be on the sign.
I think
Yeah,
LA already took Carmageddon.
Yeah, Carmageddon.
That's all.
My editorial comment on all this is, we have a generational opportunity to affect a mode switch to transit with, a proper alignment of these projects. Opening light rail, with one line service or better, and eventually 2-line service with our network restructure, that creates a 5-star transit system in the North Corridor. And we have an opportunity with the closing of I-5 for all this work to affect that switch and to get a whole new generation of folks interested in and comfortable using transit who wouldn't otherwise try it. And so there's a lot at stake here overall, more than just trying to mitigate construction impacts on a freeway project. So, that's part of the message we're conveying, and I'm enthusiastic about it if we can get it right. So thank you.
Well, I mean, the good news, if WashDOT would just wait until Link Light Rail to Linwood was set and our plan was in there, then the marketing plan writes itself, right? You don't want to be stuck in this. Take light rail, but if it happens before, there's just not much answer to it. So,
I guess I didn't know exactly how to pose this because yes, we are concentrated on what the transportation is for the people commuting up and down, but do we have some allies in the economic departments of the state? I mean, the WashDOT especially is going to put a giant plug in the bottle of our commerce going from the border of Canada down through Tacoma. And it's not going to be helpful when people are displaced into cars if we can't provide that service. So that's going to put even more traffic on there. We've got some pretty big players down in Seattle that count on a lot of people commuting in every day for work. So the whole commerce piece of this is also beginning to play in here. I haven't heard much talk about whether or not we have any allies in the economic pieces of the state.
It's a great question. So within the public sector family, we have allies in King County Metro and Seattle, City of Seattle Department of Transportation, very focused on this set of issues. We've begun reaching out to some of our business community partners, EASC and Seattle Chamber. So I know some of additional voices will be coming into this conversation. I'm not aware, and we can do some work and circle back with you about what other state agencies might be eyeing this from a more macroeconomic standpoint. But it's a great point.
That's very good. Mayor Brissell.
Just wanted to muddy the waters a little bit more. And as we talk about timing, Linwood is on track to, we're nearing completion. If our start date is pushed back, we sit there with an empty section of concrete. There's a lot of graffiti. There's lots of things that can happen when you seemingly abandon a project or postpone a project. At the same time, Bellevue has that same situation going on over there because they put in a lot of effort on their starter line, what they're now calling a starter line, but what before had just been a continuation into Bellevue and Redmond. So there's that consideration, and the other consideration is how we've built expectation for people. And sometimes people, maybe this applies to all of us. We don't listen until it hits home. We don't listen until it becomes real. And we've been building expectation for a long time. And it will be great when we have a decision so we can go back to our communities and say, here's the new deal. I think there's a lot of comfort in that. I think that there's fear when there's unknowns out there. And right now I've got a lot of community members that there's a lot of unknowns. And when that happens, that creates its own bottleneck. So decisions to be made. Jan, you mentioned who do we write to, who do we connect with? And I would suggest if we wanted to reach out, DOT, ask them, to clarify where they're going and what their impact may do, especially towards Snohomish County. Sound Transit, we've got a board meeting next week, Rick. We'll let you know. Stay tuned. Lots of conversations to happen. Whoops. The best thing we can do is not attack. Nobody's doing this to gain money, to gain anything. There's just a lot of transportation stuff happening. And as Rick mentioned, we're going to gain new riders through this. Not because somebody screwed up, but just because there's going to be a lot happening all at the same time. And people are going to start to look at transportation differently.
I don't know if anybody was trying to go north. I think it was 2 weeks ago today, Thursday, and they'd closed down a couple of lanes because of some of the WashDOT construction thing that they weren't constructing. Was a problem they had because of the construction. You couldn't go north it didn't matter whether you were trying Broadway, I-5, Colby, Marine View Drive. I mean, I tried every possible. Next was going to go rowboat, but it was not good. So that's what I envision. You can't shut two lanes down for 4 years, but anyway, so we're going to have to. Anybody else before we? I want to say thank you, but then I sort of don't. But Thank you very
Don't
much
shoot the
for
messenger.
your work on that.
Well, I want to thank the board for hearing this out and participating. These are important issues, and we felt it was very important to have a conversation publicly about it because there's a lot of work going on and some big decisions coming up, and this has been really helpful for staff. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Sean. Zero emission study. Oh, I think it's Roland Behe.
This is Jay, but I just wanted to give Jay a little bit of an intro. So, yeah, we're going to give a kind of a high level overview of current state of the zero emission project. And I just wanted to acknowledge Dee Tapia has been our project manager or program manager on this now for quite a few months. And so you've become accustomed to seeing her, especially the strategic alignment committee members, as she gives monthly updates. Dee is beginning to equip the program for a more sustainable approach over the long term, because this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, and we're going to have something like $500 million we're going to eventually have to invest in this. So we need to begin to expand capacity in the group that's working on it. And to that end, we have recently promoted Jay Heim, who's been in our transit tech group for a number of years, into the position as program manager. And so we'll begin to see more of Jay as he's managing the project moving forward and helping to pull all the different threads across the agency together in service to this initiative. So I just wanted to say congratulations to Jay, and glad to be working him on this and introduce him to the board.
Thank you very much, Roland. I'm pleased to be in front of you guys today. The microphone's a little in the face, but we'll get through it. So as mentioned, I have a brief update on the zero emissions program as a whole for you today. I'll touch on just a few things and talk about some future engagements that we'll have with the board coming up. So in terms of agenda, just a brief program update. We'll talk a little bit about the feasibility work that is ongoing, the study that we have undertaken. I'll talk about active work and a revised timeline to set the stage for you all, and then touch a little bit on some bus order targets so that you can start to wrap your brain around how all of this is going to end up working for CT. And then I'll open it up for questions, but I must admit, as I'm coming up to speed, I have probably the least amount of knowledge of anyone that you've talked to so far. So questions may be a challenge, but I promise to follow up. So in terms of our roadmap and study progress, we've highlighted 3 key areas here, being the PUD impact study, our beta pilot, and these mitigation strategies that are ongoing. The PUD impact study in particular is just kicking off. We should have that underway in the next couple weeks here. They are a key partner for us in all things zero emissions, regardless of which technology we end up going forward with, as they will be the source for all things electricity to help us either charge buses, produce hydrogen, whatever the future may hold. So understanding what they need to do in order to supply us with that power is really what that study is intended to do. We should have more information on that in about 90 days. They're looking at probably May for a final wrap up. From a feasibility study standpoint, we are continuing to look at these mitigation strategies. So we had initially done some service delivery modeling, and that demonstrated some challenges for our service to overcome in terms of how many buses we need, how far they have to run in order to fulfill the routes. Some of that mitigation comes with opportunity charging, is what we're calling that, at specific locations. So we'll put in charging stations at transit centers and other locations to charge buses along the routes. With that comes some alternatives, other options for service delivery, different models, and some cost challenges that we'll be coming back to in April to share with you. From a pilot standpoint, we are starting to prep for pilot plan development and look into building a more robust testing and evaluation plan so that we can take advantage of a new BYD coach that we've recently taken delivery of, and really evaluate how these buses are going to run with our service modeling both now and in the future. I'm hopeful that I can click on the next slide here. Okay, perfect. From a beta pilot standpoint, this bus that you see in front of you here is the one that we took delivery of. So this came to us last week. They drove it all the way up from California. So the buses can operate long distances, provided that you give them enough time to do so. They came along with a number of accessories, including chargers, generators, and a truck so that we can move these chargers around. And we're beginning a series of assessments or evaluations internally with folks such as training, IT, the data program, and transportation and operations so that we can familiarize ourselves with this new technology and understand how it operates. The vehicle maintenance team in particular has had quite an exposure to this over the last couple days. So they're the first ones to have hands-on experience with the coach. With this beta pilot, we are expecting, as I mentioned, to create a more robust testing plan that we'll share with you and drive this on the road, really get it out there, get coach operators some experience with things like regenerative braking and some of the other technologies that exist, and see what kind of range we can get in our environment. As you know, batteries tend to perform better in dry, warm weather. So cold and wet sometimes proves challenging. And we really want to kick the tires with it and get the rubber on the road to see how well these do for us. We do have a number of engagements coming up in terms of kickoff events. So we are going to do what we're calling a ZE Sip and See, zero emissions. We're going to have coffee, and folks will come by the operations base, have a chance to look at the bus, board it, ask questions, and have a mocha. So that will be our first of a number of kind of public engagements within the agency. Yeah, Taylor came up with that one. It's pretty catchy. In terms of I guess the future outlook for the program as well while we're on here, we are coming up with some strategic planning workshops to look at things such as communication strategy, policy, and grants and funding. Grants and funding in particular are a challenge for us to overcome. There's, as mentioned a few times, the number of zeros on this program is lengthy. So we want to find strategies that are sustainable for our organization as we scale into this. And then risk and technology, of course, we want to make sure that our assets are protected and able to operate without significant risk, either from cybersecurity or physical security concerns. In terms of a revised timeline, this is a little different than timelines shared in the past. So as mentioned, we're spending a lot of time on these mitigation strategies now to really unpack how we can scale into a battery electric or fuel cell hydrogen fleet. They're not exactly one-to-one, and it's not a deployment that we can take lightly. This needs to have significant strategy behind it. So to that end, this mitigation strategy is looking at cost analysis and locations where we could install chargers so that we can serve longer routes, the same type of long routes that we run today. Our consultant has noted a couple times that we're in a fairly unique position where our routes are very long and they have some grade and scale associated with those, all things that are challenging for a battery electric fleet. So to that end, the Q1 board engagement that we had planned is going to shift to April. We will share with you at that time some of the cost modeling and these mitigation strategies a little more in depth to help prep you for kind of a findings, recommendation, and decision-making process that will come towards the middle of the year. We're targeting June currently. And then in terms of bus order targets, just to set the stage here a bit, we have about 305 coaches. It's not a small amount, it's not a large amount either, but we need to be metered in how we approach the replacement of the fleet. In the near term, so 3 to 5 years out, we have purchased one battery electric and one fuel cell bus for delivery in 2024. That will supply us with the vehicles needed to do a side-by-side study. So we'll take a look at range, performance, et cetera, with kind of the second iteration of technology that the OEMs are providing. You'll see in orange here, this is kind of our nearest large chunk of cheese that we have to bite off. 55 to 60 coaches for 2027 delivery to support both expansion fleet for Gold Line in particular, and then also for some of the replacement fleet that we're looking at. So there are kind of endless changes with the technology in this space. Proterra, for example, is releasing a bus in the coming years, I believe at the end of 2023 here, that has twice as much battery capacity as some of the first gen buses. There's great strides being made in battery density. So without increasing weight of batteries or footprint, they are having significantly higher amounts of charge capacity. And those are the kinds of things that we're looking for in terms of a long-term approach and how we can adopt the best technology to fit our specific needs. And as that approach and that strategy evolves, we'll come back and share more information. So it won't be one decision. It will be a series of decisions likely, and a plan of attack to replace the fleet as a whole over some period of time. So that's kind of the goal for now. We'll come back with more information in April, as I mentioned, as well as in June, and facilitate decision-making really for that near-term fleet change. And then we'll ladder out the long-term as we go.
Yeah, I have a question. I thought, and I'll ask this to Rick, I thought the 2 buses we already bought, we were going to do the study in 2023. We're not going to do it until 2024?
Will be, so we have 2 pilot tests.
Okay.
The first one is with the 60-foot leased vehicle, the picture that you saw up there. That vehicle we have in possession. It's over at Hardison Road today. So phase 1 of our pilot testing will be using that vehicle to measure how a 60-foot articulated battery powered coach performs throughout our service network. We have portable charging equipment to support that vehicle. So we'll be stationing that around and testing different routes with the vehicle, and we'll learn a lot about the performance of that kind of vehicle. Second part of the pilot test is with the 2 additional buses that we've purchased, both of which are 40-footers, 1 electric, 1 hydrogen. Most of our South County service is delivered with 40-footers, with the exception of the Swift BRT line and the Orange line eventually. So having those 2 buses will give us a more granular look at how those vehicle types perform in the South County with the smaller vehicle, and throughout North County with a hydrogen vehicle with greater range. And then we'll be able to compare those performance characteristics and use that information to inform our procurement decisions.
Okay, for some reason I was thinking we were going to do it in 2023. So I have a question. I know this legislative session, they're looking at adding requirements for electrifying multifamily homes and even our own personal residence. If you replace a gas something, you have to put in electric. So my question is, talking with the PUD, are they saying they're going to have the capacity to not only handle our buses and all the cars, but are they going to be able to handle all of the real estate that's going electric?
That's a great question. And that is intended to be solved by this PUD impact study so that we can understand if there are significant challenges for them to deliver the power need that we will have. That study looks at both the near term. So as we scale the fleet up from kind of the first instance, do we have enough power coming to the bases to charge coaches? And then as we scale the fleet up, is there additional construction that we need to beef up substations, install new substations, bring in additional lines, have redundant lines, et cetera, so that if we went 100% electric, for example, at what point in time would we be able to support that fleet through PUD? Or is there additional means that we would need to look into? So we expect to have that information back from them in May, but all indications now are pointing to successful power delivery from PUD to meet our needs.
Well, I know in Arlington, the PUD put in that microgrid, which takes up and is bringing a whole bunch in. And I guess I need to ask one of our new council people, her husband happens to be head of the PUD.
It's a very good connection to have.
Yeah, so I need to be asking her, but because that's an issue.
Oh, for sure.
And everyone's talking about, we've even got a company in Arlington that builds the charging stations and the overhead ones and the whole works. So it's coming and people are going into it. And I just keep thinking, okay, are we gonna all of a sudden end up and start having blackouts and everything, and cars that are off on the side of the road because there wasn't enough electrical power. So,
It's a good question, and don't quote me on it. I don't think it's gonna happen. But I'm also not the one responsible for it, so.
okay.
Well, you can take a look at California, who regularly deals with issues with electricity or lack thereof. And the first thing you're likely to see is off-peak, where they will be charging you more at certain times for electricity than others. So that'll be the first iteration. And then the next, we may see brownouts or something like that. But it's been a concern of mine this whole time is with this big push for electric vehicles, which is great, but as long as our grid can handle it, right? And then I did not anticipate that the legislature would make gas not good after how many years it's been fine, and all of a sudden it's the worst thing ever. And literally legislation that says you can't put natural gas in new construction. And there will be, I remember, I guess I'm old enough to remember that natural gas was the clean energy solution. So now that is going to put on the grid more and more houses converting over to electricity. Oh, but wait, there's the other part, which is the groups that are still trying to take out our hydroelectric dams, which are providing a good portion of that electricity. So let's hope that all three of those don't combine at the same time, or yeah, we're going to be looking like California.
Yeah,
But
that's a
that's just,
very
my
important-
opinion. I keep looking up to see, we have a couple of mayors on there, but they can chime in at any time. I have not seen, and I think we've lost one anyway. We're down to Mayor Roberts up there.
I do want to say, Mayor Marine, that's a very important consideration, is how green is the power coming in? Part of our goal is to be as green as possible with this and not source, gray energy, so to speak, where it's not necessarily responsibly sourced from an environmental standpoint. And that is a challenge that many agencies are facing and many electrical providers, is how green is the hydrogen you're producing, or how green is the electricity? Because if you're burning coal to produce the power, I mean, what's the
defeats
net,
purpose,
Yeah.
And the answer is nuclear energy.
Yeah.
You can quote me
tackle
on that.
one. You go on with that. All right, anything further? I don't see any more questions. All right,
thank you very
Jay,
much.
thank you. Your first presentation, excellent job.
It is,
So-
thanks. I'll be back.
All right, thanks. All right. Will, our next board meeting, let you know, is going to be scheduled for February the 2nd at 3 o'clock. Right? We're going to take a board group photo prior to the meeting, so just be aware, what you want to wear for that group photo. And if you can, will we like them to come a little early? Or are we going to do it after? Okay, a little before would be good. And our next meeting, remember, we're going to be voting on chair, vice chair, secretary, and then wherever I sit. I think is, wherever you guys are going to put me. Yeah. Oh, and the PSRC, our representative there, which we'll know a little bit more about tonight from our Snohomish County Cities Dinner. Any board communication? Anybody have anything for the good of the order? No, that is it. All right. Do you have anything, Rick?
I think we've had enough.
Okay, and we don't have an executive session, so we are adjourned.
Has it been